Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this morning at the Chicagoland Walk Experience. My name is Sean Conley, and I'm a board member for the Illinois chapter of AFSP. This is the Orange Bead discussion. So we're going to discuss the loss of a sibling, its impact, and how we all find hope. My sister Alex died by suicide 7.5 years ago. She had bipolar disorder and was never really able to maintain consistent access to healthcare. And after she passed away, I spent a lot of time just completely lost, and just sort of listless. And I still remember 6.5 years ago, when I went to my first Out of the Darkness walk at Grant Park, just the amount of overwhelming love and support and energy that I felt coming from all over the place. And it was really the first day that I felt like I can put myself together and figure out where to go from here. And I still get that every time that I go. And I know this is different because it's virtual, but we're going to recreate some of that here today. So I'm deeply honored to be a part of this morning. And I'm so happy for anyone that was able to get here this Sunday morning. With that, though, let's introduce our panelists. So we'll start with Amy and then Devin, if you just want to both introduce yourselves, and then we'll kind of get this conversation started.
Sure.
Hi, I'm Amy Kartheiser. I lost my sibling, Mark Reavers, to suicide 6 years ago. And Sean, you want me to keep talking?
Sorry. Sure, absolutely. Share the story and go ahead. Yep.
Okay, so Mark, as far as we all knew, was not suffering from any mental illness. So he was always the same happy-go-lucky guy that we knew until he died. And it really took all of us. It was completely shocking to all of us. So we didn't know that he was suffering. And he's the oldest. Him and my other brother, they're identical twins. They're the oldest of the six of us. And then there's 4 girls. And when he died, we got a call that he had passed away, but we didn't know what the cause was. And in my mind, I went, oh, it must have been a heart attack because he was 52, or maybe he had a brain aneurysm. And I specifically said to myself, I know it wouldn't have been suicide. He would never do that. And so then when we got the call the next day of how he actually died, it was completely shocking to all of us. He was married. He had a family. He never shared with his wife or his children or his twin brother or his parents the depression he was having, the loss of his job. He never shared that with anyone, the loss of finances and the financial stress he was exhibiting, or was experiencing, I should say. So it was completely overwhelming for all of us. And the pain, as everyone knows, was completely unbearable. I think what makes me the saddest out of all of that is that he suffered silently and felt like he couldn't share. And that's what really kind of catapulted me into my journey with AFSP. And I love their hashtag Talk Saves Lives, because I truly believe that if Mark maybe hadn't been concerned about what other people would have thought, and that he could have shared that he was depressed and what was going on in his life, he would have. So being with AFSP and going on these walks really gives us the opportunity to be with other people who have experienced what we have and understand the pain that we have all gone through. But I love the fact that it puts us on the streets of Chicago, and it allows us to start to have a conversation, not just among all of us, but the people in the city of Chicago see our banners, see our posters, see our shirts that we wear, and understand what we're walking for. And maybe they're having the conversation among their little groups or in their cars as they pass by us on the streets. And I think that's what a lot of it is about, is being able to be courageous in talking with not only people who have lost loved ones, but people who are suffering, erasing that stigma so that people feel comfortable having the conversation, and just finding a place that's safe, and I find the walks are a very safe place to be. So that's kind of been our connection.
Absolutely. No, I think that's great. And I know one of the frustrating things is, especially from the sibling side of this, is, I know it was the same with Alex. Once we got the news, all I wanted to do was talk to Alex, and that is extremely challenging. It's really tricky. And so I think that's true. And I also know the bus route right by my house has a Chicagoland walk banner on the side of it still this year, and I've seen that same bus every day, and I do think it's good. And I think it does drive some interesting conversations. So thanks, Amy. Devin, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. So my name is Devin. I lost my twin brother Drew about 4.5 years ago. So it was in July of 2016. Drew was somebody who, well, first of all, we knew he struggled, so it wasn't. Of course, it's a shock. But he did struggle with his battle with depression and anxiety for a long time. He was a perfect example of somebody that is genuine, happy, dedicated, hardworking. He went to Michigan State. He wanted to be a psychiatrist. He was very smart and very he's probably one of the nicest, happiest people. When you talk about me and him as twins, he was always the one that's the nice one, the one that everybody, it was obvious he was like the one that it was so genuine and nice to be around. And it was I kind of tell people he's a great example of someone that, my family did provide for him years of quality mental health care, and giving him trying to give him everything he need, whether it was facilities or therapists or medications, or he had been to rehab centers, and there's other things and I try to tell people like that, like kind of opening that discussion about the actual disease that he suffered from for a long time, and that it could go either way, where you don't have any access, but he's an example of someone that did, and we knew about it, and it was still that giant mountain to overcome. And it just, he definitely battled with that for a long time, but he was still very hardworking, very genuine, loved what he was doing. Was about to graduate from Michigan State. So we were about 21 when it happened. And so, it's just kind of like, it was obviously shocking. And like you said, Sean, it's like when stuff happens, you want to talk to them, and you're like, oh, damn, no, I can't. So it's definitely like that weird kind of realization and like understanding, like, okay, this is what's happening now. But I like to tell people, like, it's like there's so many sides of suicide, where it's it's obviously not discussed enough, but where there's always the ones where you're not you're never aware of what's happening to somebody. And with Drew, I always say we were aware of what was happening with him, and we did everything we could. And I tell my parents we did everything we could, from whether it's financial assistance, whether it's healthcare assistance, whether it's anything that we could do, we did it. And this was still the end result. So I like to show people that that's how important the discussion of actual mental illness is. And of course, like, and just acknowledging the depth of the illness, and that it is something that's very serious. And regardless if you have a ton of access to something or not, and of course, everybody deserves equal access to mental health care. But it's still such a tricky and such a terrible illness that it's, you might do everything you can, and that end result is still there. So that's something that's, at least helped me, and I've tried to help my family, and like the result was there. So we can't, unfortunately, we can't sit there and be like, you always go through the what ifs after this kind of loss, whether it's like the guilt or whatever it might be, what could I have done differently? And that's, of course, part of the grief process that we had to go through. But I like to say, we did a lot, and we did is more than we even knew we could do. And this is where the result ended. So I like to, tell people that, like, that's something that helped me, like, get over the hump, like, in terms of like that, what could I have done differently? And I think that's a question that someone who experiences this loss is always going to linger in the back of their head. But I think it's something that's, helped me, where I've gotten past that, where it's not like, what could I have done differently? And more so, just moving forward and seeing how I can deal with this grief. And I think that's something that And then AFSP was, I can't remember how I got involved in it, but it was right after he passed. So I went to the walk right after. So this is like my fifth. Um, so we got very involved, my mom and myself and my dad, and I started volunteering. So I've been volunteering for AFSP for the last like 5 years. And I think it was similar to what you said, Sean. It was just so refreshing, and it was just nice to be around so many other people that like this experience isn't like this like no, something that nobody else has experienced. I think it was nice to have that community and where everybody is grieving, but everybody is hopeful. And I think it was nice to, in that, period of terrible loss, that, there's all these people that are looking to help us and help, help and, decrease suicide and help that goal move forward. And I think that was something that me and my family kind of immediately felt a connection to. And so that's something that to this day, I still do my best to help in any way I can. And hopefully, and we'll see how much, how many more years I can hopefully volunteer for this organization. But I definitely am excited to be a part of another walk as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember the first year I went to, I was just a mess. I was a big ball of tears. And I remember just I was just flooded with that. And I had not prepared for that at all. And it just felt like a big mama bear gave me a collective hug. And I didn't know how to articulate what I was feeling, because it was sort of like they're caring for me. They care about Alex. They understand where I've been maybe, but I didn't know anybody. I hadn't talked to anybody. I still get that. And I think that too, understanding that this volunteer journey is a engagement and kind of also a personal care. I'm in really hard for a couple of years, and I think that's part of the lifelong grieving process is that you learn how to, I can really do this for a few months, a few years sustained, then I need to take some time for myself, and then I come back to it. I think that that's totally fine, and I think AFSP is uniquely situated to do that. I also like what you're talking about, though, where I think one of the big things I've really enjoyed at the AFSP and just generally suicide prevention circles has been this talk about language. And Amy, you talked about stigma as well and reducing that. But rather than saying commit, talking about the person dying by suicide, we don't talk about someone committed cancer. Someone didn't commit heart disease. So as our understanding of this evolves and as our understanding becomes more complete about mental health as a parity to physical health, I think that that's really crucial. And that also provides solace to those of us, the siblings who are still here. It's not this horrible thing. It can just be they lost the battle to bipolar disorder. They lost the battle to something else. And maybe they didn't ever get to talk about it, or maybe they just couldn't. My sister was a multiple attempt survivor. And so it was one of those things where it was on our radar, and it didn't make it less devastating. And it certainly didn't make it any easier for anyone to say, well, how could she do that to you? It's like, well, no. This was, it's a complication of the disease. And so I think that these types of conversations here in 2020 are not the types of conversations that the city as a whole was having in 2010, and certainly not in the 90s. So I think we're seeing progress on those fronts right now. Yes. So thank you both for introducing yourself. I think the first question I want to kind of ask is, so, what have you found helpful as you've grieved your losses in this journey? Kind of, what have been some highlights or some strategies or just some experiences or one-offs that have been helpful to get you through this? And Amy, if you want to start.
Okay. I've got probably a few things that have been really helpful for me. One has been, this might sound goofy to people, but I actually talked to my brother out loud. That has been really, personally for me, that has been amazing. And after Mark had died, I would go take these walks in the city on the lakefront. And I just felt the need to be by the water and just like speak to him. And I'd be like looking over my shoulder to make sure people weren't looking at me like I was crazy. But I feel like talking to him out loud has been one of the best things. So I kind of put my AirPods in now. I listen to music and we just talk. And now it's like, with a mask on and sunglasses, like no one really needs to know what you're doing, or they can't see your mouth moving. It's kind of nice. But I still do it to this day. I go walk outside and I go talk to him, and I believe he hears me. I also think, right from the get-go, I talked about it. It was really interesting. Like when Mark had died, I quickly went to my parents' house, kind of packed a bag, stayed there for a while. And I remember my dad, we'd go take a walk every day together. And my dad saying to me, well, how is it that you can tell people what happened? And I'm like, I'd actually already been through this with a friend's husband. He had died by suicide 4 years prior. So as a collective group, my friends, we had all kind of been through this journey. And so I was like, well, Dad, if you don't talk about it, you know, it's not helping you personally. You're just gonna hold it inside, and that is just gonna cause so much damage. And so by sharing our stories and talking about what happened, is really healing, you know? And so finding people, whether that's another sibling or a family member or a friend or a group that you find outside of, your network, maybe it's through AFSP, but finding some place to talk to others about it, I think is very healing too. You know, it was really interesting story is that my parents shared theirs. So my dad started talking about it. I think at first he didn't want people to know that is how my brother died. I think people take it personally. And I think parents, it weighs heavily on parents that they feel like perhaps they didn't do a good job parenting or raising their kids right, that this would happen. It was really an awful experience to hear my dad share those words. But when my dad started telling people, there's a friend of theirs from 25 years ago always told everyone that their son died because he had heart disease. And it was the first time in 25 years that because my parents said how Mark had died, that they actually told the real reason their son had died, and he had died by suicide. And they had been holding that in for 25 years. So I think, you know, it's very healing, not only for yourself, but I think for other people, because on this journey, as we all know, we kind of start to connect with people who've had the same experience. So that's been really good. The other thing that I think has been really good for me is that I found the first holiday, the first birthday, especially for you, Devin, being a twin, I imagine incredibly difficult. The 1 year anniversary, I had no idea how that was going to kind of rock my world. So I think having a plan, and even if the plan is you're sitting at home, you know, like just know what you're going to do on that day. Because to me, it was just getting through it. You just needed to get on the other side of it. It was Thanksgiving was our first holiday, and we were all so stressed out about it because Mark would come in for every Thanksgiving and we'd have this big family get together. And then I woke up the next day and I'm like, I did that, you know, like I got through it. But it's kind of having a plan and knowing that once you're on the other side, I feel like that is just, you know, then you know you can get to the next one and have a plan and get to the other side of it. I think is really helpful. Those are kind of what I experienced.
No, I think that's great. And I think a lot of that goes together too. I know the holiday planning is so tricky, and it's every year, frankly, you know, so I'm coming up, I guess, on my 8th holiday season without Alex, and like, it doesn't ever get different necessarily. And what I like is that it forces that conversation, Amy, too, within your network. You know, I'm dating somebody who wasn't in the picture 7.5 years ago. And so each year we kind of discuss it as well. And like, you know, hey, it gives me a time to check my personal mental health, but also to remind people that it's like, hey, this is how I want to articulate this year. So I want the turkey and the Norman Rockwell thing, and I want it all at home. And other years is like, I need a break. I can't do it right now. And so it is really interesting. And I think having that evolving dynamic conversation is really cool.
Yeah, that's a good point. And because I've got other siblings too, everyone's different. You know, it really taught me that everyone grieves differently, whether it's my parents or my siblings, we all grieve differently. And that was a huge lesson in this for me, because no one reacted to things maybe the way I did, or some did and some didn't. And so like, as the holiday approaches, like you said, you may need a break, and some of us may all need to be together, and we all just need to be really respectful of what each other needs as these holidays and whatnot take place.
Yeah, exactly. And then Devin, what do you think? I mean, what have you found helpful throughout this process?
So throughout this process, luckily for me, I do have very loving and caring parents, and a network of friends, and a very caring just network that has been very understanding of my process, what's best for me, and I've kind of helped balance it with even my parents as well, and kind of like showing that. So we've experienced this tragic loss, and now what's most important is making sure that we're taking care of ourselves first. And I know that's a difficult um, idea to grasp sometimes, and sometimes you feel a little selfish. But at least and I think it took me probably a year or two to even get to that point where it's like, like you said, Sean, it could like Amy, it could be something simple. Like I'm not ready to do this. I don't want to do this today. And I think it's just something I've kind of had to work hard to learn and kind of push on my network and try to be in a respectful way. But it's sort of like realizing what like I need to do what's best for me. At least in the short term, in the long term, whatever is best for you. But I think it helped me kind of getting to that point where if I'm not comfortable with something, if I don't want to do something, I need to hit that point where this isn't what's best for me right now. And just, being honest, and hopefully those who care about you are respectful of your requests around you and understanding, and and that can open a dialogue, and you can explain to them, be like, this is how my family feels, or how we feel after this loss. And it's kind of like opening that discussion where so now people, friends, family, coworkers are a little more understanding. They might even be more respectful and ask in the future about what you're comfortable with, what you're able to do. And I think that's something that I lost Drew when I was 21. So I was kind of hitting that, I just graduated college, and, all my friends are still in that 22, 23 like area. And, didn't want to do certain things for a couple of years. And I'd have to explain, like, listen, like, I'm not that person anymore. I'm not in that mind space anymore. I don't want to do the things that 21 and 22-year-olds want to do at the moment. And I think that was something that took me a little while to get to, and kind of be like, I don't want to be forced to be, or I don't want to be in the situations where I'm uncomfortable or I'm not in the right state of mind. And I think that's something that helped me, and I try to help my family and others that are involved in this loss as well. And I think it's just something that to recognize, like, I can do certain things, I can't do certain things anymore, and this is what I kind of opening up those dialogues and those boundaries. And I think something that also really helped, which I didn't really get to till about a year and a half after, I did start going to like a young adult law support group. And I think it's something that there's a lot of little things that can help you get over it, or like get through it, especially that hard first couple months, first couple years. But it definitely was nice to like be around people like that are closer to my age, that have experienced recent loss, whether it's a few months, a few years. And it's just nice to have like that, like, where everybody in the room understands to an extent of what you're going through, whether you're saying something that makes total sense or makes no sense. And it's kind of like, because it's hard to, people will never understand this type of loss unless they've experienced it themselves. And I think that's fair, for anybody and it's just definitely nice to be like, I don't have to explain myself to this group. And I think I had that kind of, once a month type of, camaraderie to look forward to. And I think that's something that helped me, at least early on. And especially for me, I know it's even harder because I did lose a twin, and it's something that, it's just like an added level, and it is very complicated sometimes for me to even verbalize.
Mm-hmm.
But it definitely was nice to have, like, once I was ready to talk about it. And that's why I tell people who are early, like, if I meet someone early on in their grieving stages, I didn't really even talk about it until about a year and a half out. So I tell, everybody's grieving timeline is different. Everybody is comfortable with different things. And, I even in the groups with people that have just lost someone in the past month or two or a couple months, I commend them and say this is a very big step, and it's very difficult, and I know it is because I wasn't ready to do it at that time. And it's definitely like, they should, somebody who's early in their grieving process should feel, proud of themselves if they're able, like, no matter what they're able to do following it. Any steps you're able to take to kind of at least start addressing that grief, I think is powerful. Because looking back at it with myself, I wish I had done it earlier. I wasn't ready. I was, 22 years old. I didn't want to talk about it. But I wish I had done it a little earlier because I felt a lot better once I started taking some tangible tactics to start addressing my grief. So I definitely think it's something that whatever's most comfortable to somebody in this process, but I'd say I recommend addressing it sooner than later. However that might look, of course, is up to the individual's story and what works best for you. But I do recommend, doing some sort of, outreach or some sort of activity that can at least help you like acknowledge the situation and try to address that grief you're going through. However, that might be perfect for you. But that's something that looking back, I'm like, I am happy I did it, but I also know I should have done it sooner. So it's something that I try to verbalize to other people that might be going through something similar.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. For me, on doing the walk the first year, I think it was an invitation for people to actually talk to me about it, and it was this interesting dynamic. And then from there, kind of to something Amy was saying, I had a few friends who were on my walk team who said that their family came together and said, Grandpa actually, we think it was a suicide decades ago. And then our family never really came to terms with this because we didn't know we were allowed to, and we didn't know how to. And it wasn't because of anybody, it was just, we don't know what we're doing. And I think it's really interesting. And I know, the grieving thing in some ways it's a constant struggle. And Devin, I think you're 100% right to it. The beginning phases, it's so difficult and you're all over the place and engaging with it is so difficult. But I know I was the younger sibling and I was about 22 when Alex died too. And so I was in this weird state of flux. My family's all from Alabama. And so it's a big family, but we just had another loss. And it was someone who had died by cancer, one of my father's siblings. What was really interesting when we kind of got together, though, because he and our emotional intelligence is certainly higher than it ever was, as far as like we communicate because we kind of got down to the bare bones level of grief. He was extremely upset. I was extremely upset when Alex died. And there wasn't anything else other than just two very raw emotional beings together for a while. And it's been interesting to see how obviously we want Alex. We want to have that person back. And we wish we weren't in this position. But he and I talk to each other differently. We see each other in a way that I don't think I saw my father before. And he doesn't see me the same way either. And so I think that having those tough conversations or finding mechanisms like these walks, like just posting stuff about AFSP if you're not ready to fully engage, kind of gives people that green light to say like, hey, I'm here and I'm open to having the conversation. I'm open to talking about it and letting everybody go down their own track. I think one thing that's interesting from the siblings perspective, and again, Amy and Devin, you both mentioned this, is that it's like, yeah, your parents are going through something. Anyone else that got left behind too is going through something. And so we can sometimes be in this weird or I felt like, I'm trying to manage everybody else's thing too. And taking that specific time for your own loss and for your own relationship that look different than anyone else's to your sibling can be tricky. And for anyone else on this call, I think that that's always very true. Well, so it's 10:30 now. I think we have maybe a few minutes to just wrap this up. I was going to say we would take questions from the people here, but I don't think we actually have time for that. So why don't we just leave sort of with, and then you started this a little bit there. Why don't we just leave with telling people, what is something you would want somebody starting this journey, and if that's just that they've just now started coming to this experience, if they're just now ready to talk about it, or if they just recently experienced a loss, or if it was 10 years ago, wherever you are on this kind of journey, someone who's just starting it, what would you want them to know? Like, what would you tell them about what lies ahead and just words of wisdom or advice?
For me, that you can get through it, like it doesn't seem possible at the time. And you don't know your own strength. I think you are really taken to the test to show how strong you really are. And that there is, you know, kind of like I talked about, like the holidays and stuff, but getting through the grief, there is another side. You know, you can get through it. It is never over. It is never done, but it will be different, you know, as each year progresses. I'm in year 6 now. I think and still talk to Mark every single day. I think about him, you know, the first year it was probably 100 times a day. I don't think I'm exaggerating, but now I'm probably at like 5 to 10. Some days maybe it's 1, some days it may be 20, you know, but I'm probably averaging about there. Funny enough, I'm still not at a place 6 years later where I can tell humorous stories, and I thought I would be there already. So I'm not there yet. So don't put pressure on yourself to expect that you're going to be a certain way in a certain amount of time. I'm amazed at the strength that I found in myself. And it has really helped me get through other things in my life. Literally, I think, you know, I'm very grateful for what I've learned in this journey about myself. And it really has helped me in many, many other aspects of my life. So my biggest piece of advice is, I know how dark it is right now and how awful it is at the beginning, but you will get through it. You will be changed forever, but it will always stick with you. It'll never go away, but you will get past the hardship of it. That's good enough.
No, that's great. Yeah. Devin, do you have any kind of final words?
Yeah, I mean, echoing on some of the points that Amy made, it's definitely, it's something that, you know, obviously, you know, you can even see that in the beginning. This isn't going to go away. It's never going to go away. But, you know, and it sounds cliche or basic that it gets easier, air quotes, you know, like Amy said, it changes. It will get different. Some things will be easier the longer you get throughout the grief process. You know, I do like to say to people that are, you know, just recently experiencing their loss, and it's and how hard it seems, and it's like you don't, you know, you think you're never going to get past this you know, consuming pain of grief, but it does wane, and it does change as you get a little further on. And I think it's something that I like to echo. Like I said earlier, I think that's where I think the two things for me is, I think addressing that grief as soon as you are comfortable with is very important. You know, obviously don't push yourself to do something you're not comfortable with. This isn't a static type of timeline of grief. It's definitely dynamic, and it can change in any given day. But I think that addressing it is, you know, whenever, as soon as you're ready, is definitely very helpful, because it can help you improve how you're doing, and it can help you move forward and start addressing, which is like the main question, like, what do I do now? Like, it's kind of like that, where you're not sure where to go or what to do. And I think the other one where like I said earlier with me, is just focusing on yourself, you know, following that grease, you know, making sure that your comfort, your safety, your happiness, that's most important. And I think sometimes it's hard, you know, especially when you have other family members, and, you know, like you said, Sean, sometimes you're trying to, you know, make sure you're helping everybody else out. Like, you have parents, you have siblings, your grandparents, aunts, whatever it might be, and everybody's grieving in a different way. And sometimes you think you might have to either hide it because you just don't want to dump your grief on someone else that's also grieving. And it's kind of just like that balance, but really recognizing that what you need at the time is what's most important. Whether you think whether, you know, I felt selfish, it's, you know, you might think like, okay, now I'm not, you know, being helpful to someone else, but you have to hit that point where, like, what I need to do for myself is what's best, for me to continue advancing through this grieving process. And that's something, like, once I hit that, you know, like that acknowledgement, I'm like, okay, now I'm actually improving, and I'm starting to move forward and think about how I can advance my life, following this loss. And I think that's something that like is a difficult hump to get over. But I think that's something that I always recommend to anybody experiencing grief after this type of loss is you have to put exactly what you want first, and whatever that might look like. And I think that's something that's important and something that's difficult. But I know that's something that I like to this day that definitely helped me out.
Yeah, I think that's great. And it's such a journey, and I know every day and every year I find something where I'm like, oh, that hits me different this year than it did last year than I think it maybe would have. And it's everything. It's, I'm 30 now. I'm not 22. Alex has passed away. Everyone else has reacted to that, as well as me changing every other element. It's difficult to articulate to people where it's like, oh no, it's literally everything kind of shifts, not necessarily goes upside down. And then that shifting just kind of is a continuation. And so occasionally, even Devin, when you realize like, hey, I'm prioritizing myself by doing this behavior right now, I've more times than I ever should admit to have had to walk that back the next year. It's like, hey, you know what? Now I want the opposite of that. Now I want this other thing. And I think that that's okay. And building up that kind of honesty and trying to just communicate as much as possible is my piece of advice to anybody. And knowing that we're here and that there are a lot of people who love and care and support you as well. And to always remember, here in the city, there's some great resources. AFSP.org has some good resources for you because it's a challenge too. It's our mental health is completely under barrage when that goes on too. This grieving process is really difficult. So just remember to take care of yourself and then to start slowly and on your own timeline, begin the process. I think that's it. So this was supposed to go till 10:30. It's 10:37. So thank you, Devin. Thank you, Amy, so much. There's comments if anyone wants to say anything, but we got some nice hugs, virtual hugs and things, and we like to see that. So I think that's all. So thank you so much both for coming, and hopefully everyone can hang in there for the next session.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Devin.
you so much, Sean. Thank you, Amy.